Welcome to Wild Lore Bedtime Stories. Tonight you'll hear The Sparrow and the Golden String. This is the story of the Fable. A voice that carries weight without shouting. A wisdom that lands softly. If this is your archetype, this is the quiet power you hold. The sparrow woke before the others, as she always did. The forest was still wrapped in the gray-blue of early morning. The kind of light that made everything look like a secret waiting to be told. Mist clung to the low branches, and the air smelled of damp bark and the first green of spring. She stretched her wings, feeling the familiar ache of muscles that had carried her through another night. Her nest was small but sturdy, woven from twigs and dry grass, tucked into the crook of an old oak. It had been her mother's nest once, and her mother's mother's before that. The sparrow did not know how many generations had slept here, but she felt them sometimes. A warmth in the walls that had nothing to do with feathers. She hopped to the edge of the branch and looked down at the forest floor. That was when she saw it. A thread of gold lay across the moss, catching the thin light like a fallen sunbeam. It was no thicker than a blade of grass, no longer than her wingspan, but it shimmered with a warmth that seemed to come from inside itself. The sparrow tilted her head. She had seen many things in this forest. Acorns and berries, feathers and bones, the discarded things of creatures who had moved on, but she had never seen anything like this. She glided down and landed beside it. Up close, the thread hummed faintly, a sound more felt than heard. She reached out with her beak and lifted it. The gold was lighter than she expected, and warmer. It curled gently against her chest as if it belonged there. Her mother's voice rose from memory, unbidden and clear. "What you carry, carries you." The sparrow had heard those words 100 times as a fledgling, usually when she complained about the twigs her mother made her gather, or the seeds she had to store for winter. She had never quite understood them. Carrying was carrying. What you held was weight, and weight was burden. But standing here now with the golden string resting against her feathers, she wondered if her mother had meant something else entirely. The sparrow looked up at the waking forest. Other birds were beginning to stir, the rustle of wings, the first tentative songs. She could leave the string here. It wasn't food, it wasn't shelter. It served no obvious purpose. But something in her chest, small and stubborn, said, "Take it." So she did. Act 1. The Call to Carry. She flew back to her branch with the string clutched carefully in her beak. It was awkward to carry, too long to hold neatly, too delicate to grip tightly. By the time she reached the oak, her neck ached and her wings felt heavier than usual. She set the thread down in her nest and caught her breath. The other birds noticed almost immediately. A jay landed 2 branches above, his blue feathers sharp against the morning gray. He craned his neck and let out a laugh that sounded like breaking sticks. "What is that? A worm made of sunlight?" "It's a thread," the sparrow said. "I found it." "A thread?" The jay tilted his head, eyes bright with mockery. "And what exactly does a thread do? Can you eat it? Can it keep you warm?" Before she could answer, a finch fluttered down, curious. Then a wren. Then a young crow who rarely spoke but always watched. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered on the branches around her nest, all of them staring at the golden string. "It's pretty," the finch admitted. "But pretty doesn't fill a belly." "It's strange," the wren added, her voice thin with suspicion. "Where did it come from? Things that shine like that usually mean trouble." The crow said nothing, but his dark eyes followed the string's faint glow. The sparrow felt heat rise in her chest. Not anger, but something quieter. The need to explain. The need to make them understand. But understand what? She didn't know herself why the string mattered. She only knew that it did. "My mother used to say," she began, and the words came slowly, pulled from a place she hadn't visited in years. "What What you carry carries you. I think this is something worth carrying. The jay snorted. Your mother was a sparrow, not a philosopher. No offense. The others laughed, not cruelly, but dismissively. The way you laugh at a child who insists the moon is following her home. They did not mean harm. They simply did not see. One by one, they flew away back to their own nests, their own seeds, their own concerns. The sparrow watched them go. The morning light had shifted, turning the forest from gray to gold, but the warmth didn't reach her. She looked down at the string, still resting in the curve of her nest. It shimmered quietly, asking nothing. She could throw it away. Let it fall back to the forest floor where it would be buried by leaves and forgotten. That would be the sensible thing, the easy thing. Instead, she began to weave. She worked the golden thread into the walls of her nest, looping it between twigs, threading it through the dry grass. It was slow work, and her beak grew tired, but with each pass, the nest seemed to grow stronger. The string caught the light and held it, and by the time she finished, her small home glowed faintly, as if lit from within. She stepped back and looked at what she had made. It was still a sparrow's nest, nothing grand, nothing remarkable, but it was hers, and now it held something more than shelter. Her mother's voice came again, softer this time. What you carry carries you. The sparrow tucked her wings against her sides and settled into the nest's warmth. She did not yet understand the lesson, but she was beginning to feel it. Act 2, The Ascent of Doubt. Days passed, and the sparrow lived with her golden threaded nest. She gathered seeds, she sang her morning songs. She flew the familiar paths between oak and stream and meadow, and slowly, without meaning to, she began to notice things she had never noticed before. The way the finch hoarded more than she could eat, then forgot where she'd buried half of it. The way the jay mocked everything he didn't understand, which was most things. The way the wren worried so constantly about danger that she never seemed to rest. The sparrow saw these patterns like threads of their own, invisible but woven through every day, and she began to wonder, did they see them too? Did anyone? She tried once to speak of it. The finch was complaining about the cold, about the lack of good seeds, about the way the creek had shifted course and made everything harder. The sparrow listened, and when there was a pause, she said, "Maybe the hard things are carrying us somewhere." The finch stared at her. "What?" The sparrow stumbled over her own words. Sometimes what feels like burden is actually what? The finch ruffled her feathers impatiently. A gift? A lesson? You sound like an owl, Sparrow, and not a smart one. The sparrow fell silent. The finch flew away, still muttering. That night, the sparrow sat in her nest and felt the sting of being misunderstood. She had seen something true. She was sure of it, but the words had come out wrong. Too big for the moment, too strange for the listener. She had reached across and found only air. Her mother's voice quiet in memory. Truth isn't heard until the listener is ready. She had forgotten that one. It surfaced now like a seed buried in snow, finally reaching sun. But the sparrow was not patient by nature. She was small and quick, and when she saw something clearly, she wanted others to see it too. The golden string had shown her a way of looking at the world. Patterns beneath patterns, meaning inside the ordinary. Why couldn't they understand? She began to speak more. To the wren, she said, "Your worry is a wall you build each day. What if you stopped building?" To the jay, she said, "Your laughter hides something. What are you afraid to say seriously?" They did not thank her. The wren avoided her for a week. The jay called her the little professor with a sharpness that drew blood. Even the young crow, who had always watched her with something like respect, turned away. The sparrow returned to her nest and felt the weight of her own righteousness. She had been so sure she was helping. But certainty, she realized, could be its own kind of blindness. What you carry carries you, and she had been carrying judgment. It was heavier than she'd known. Of all the birds, it was the crow who troubled her most. He was young, barely a season past fledging, and he had a stillness that set him apart from the others. He did not chatter. He did not mock. He simply watched, with eyes like dark water, taking everything in and giving nothing back. The sparrow had tried to reach him more than once. She sensed something in him, a heaviness, a question he couldn't ask. But every time she approached, he flew away. Not rudely, just away. One evening, she found him sitting alone on a low branch near the stream, staring at the water. "You're always watching," she said softly, landing nearby. "What do you see?" He didn't look at her. "Nothing that matters." "Everything matters," she said. "That's what I've learned. Even the smallest." "You've learned." His voice was flat. "You found a shiny thread and now you think you understand the world. But you don't know anything about me, about what I carry." The words landed like stones. The sparrow opened her beak to respond, but nothing came. He was right. She had been so busy trying to teach that she had never thought to ask. The crow spread his wings and lifted into the darkening sky. She watched him go, and for the first time, she felt the limits of her own wisdom. Some threads could not be woven by force. Some lessons had to wait. Act 3. The Storm and the Binding. The storm came without true warning, as the worst ones always do. One moment the sky was heavy and gray, the next, it had split open. Rain fell in the sheets, driven sideways by wind that bent the trees like blades of grass. Lightning cracked across the darkness and thunder shook the forest to its roots. The sparrow pressed herself into her nest, wings tight against her body, and felt the oak tremble beneath her. The golden thread glowed faintly in the walls, pulsing with each gust but holding. Her nest swayed but did not break. Around her she could hear the cries of other birds, nests torn loose, branches snapping, the terrible sound of homes coming apart. The storm did not care who had worked hard or who had been clever. It only cared about what could hold. When the first pause came, a breath between waves of wind, she flew. Her first instinct was to guard what she had. Her nest was strong. Her thread had held. She could wait out the storm alone, safe in what she had built, and let the others manage their own disasters. The thought lasted only a moment, but she felt its pull. The temptation to hoard her wisdom the way the finch hoarded seeds. To let her insight become a wall instead of a bridge. Her mother's voice cut through the wind. A thread kept only for yourself will eventually strangle you. She had never heard that one before. Perhaps she was making it up, or perhaps her mother was still teaching. Even now. She flew into the rain. The finch's nest was gone. Scattered across 3 branches, nothing left but a few wet feathers. The finch herself huddled in a hollow, shivering. "Come with me," the sparrow said. "Why?" The finch's voice was dull. "What's the point? It's all gone." The sparrow wanted to say something wise, something about rebuilding, about how loss carries its own lessons, about the golden thread and what it had taught her. But looking at the finch, soaked, trembling, hollow-eyed, she realized that wisdom wasn't what was needed. Not yet. "Because you're cold," she said simply, "and my nest is warm." It was not a lesson. It was not a metaphor. It was just true. The finch blinked. Then, slowly, she followed. The jay had lost his nest too. She found him on a high branch, feathers plastered flat, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. "Don't," he said before she could speak. "Don't tell me what this means." Don't tell me what I should learn from this. I can't. His voice cracked. I can't hear it right now. The sparrow closed her beak on the words that had been forming there. He was right. There was a time for meaning and a time for silence. She had confused them before. She would not confuse them now. I won't, she said. Just come. He looked at her for a long moment, suspicion and exhaustion warring in his eyes. Then he nodded and flew beside her through the rain. By the time they reached the oak, the sparrow had gathered the finch, the jay, the wren, and 3 other small birds whose nests had been destroyed. They crowded onto the branches around her nest, wet and frightened, pressing close for warmth. But one was missing. The crow, she said. Has anyone seen the crow? No one had. She flew back into the storm. She found him on the ground, the worst place to be in a storm. He was huddled beneath a fallen branch, one wing bent at a wrong angle, his dark eyes wild with pain. Leave me, he said. I'm too heavy. You can't carry me. The sparrow landed beside him. Rain streamed down her feathers. She could barely keep her footing against the wind. He was right. She couldn't carry him. Not alone. Not with her body. But she thought of the golden thread woven into her nest. She thought of her mother's words. What you carry carries you. I'm not going to carry you, she said. I'm going to stay with you until you can move. Why? The word was almost lost in the wind. Because I finally understand. She tucked herself against his uninjured side, offering what little warmth she had. The thread isn't meant to be kept. It's meant to be given. And you, she paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like a lesson. You matter, even if you don't believe it yet. He stared at her. The wildness in his eyes shifted into something else. Not understanding, not yet, but the beginning of it. They waited together as the storm raged, and when it finally began to ease, the crow stood on shaking legs and let the sparrow guide him back to the oak. The morning after the storm, the forest looked like it had been turned inside out. Branches lay scattered across the ground. Nests hung in ruins. The stream had swollen past its banks, leaving mud and debris in its wake. But in the old oak, 7 birds sat together, alive. The sparrow looked at her nest, still standing, still glowing faintly with the golden thread. And she made a decision. She began to unweave. What are you doing? The finch asked, alarmed. Sharing, the sparrow said. She pulled the golden thread free, strand by strand, and carried pieces of it to each bird. She helped them weave it into their new nests. The finches, the jays, the wrens, the crows. The thread stretched further than she had thought possible, as if it grew with the giving. By evening, the oak held 7 nests, each glowing faintly with gold. The birds sat in their new homes, quiet and wondering. The crow spoke first. Why did you do that? It was yours. The sparrow looked at him, at all of them, and felt the words finally come clear. It was never mine to keep. It was mine to carry until I understood what it was for. She paused. My mother used to say, what you carry carries you. I think she meant that the things we hold, the truths, the lessons, the small bright things we find along the way, they only become real when we give them away, when we weave them into each other. The jay for once did not laugh. The wren for once did not worry. The finch for once did not complain. The crow looked at his own nest, threaded with gold, and said quietly, I think I'm starting to understand. The sparrow felt something lift in her chest, not the thread which was gone now distributed among the branches, something lighter, something that had been waiting to be released. She had carried the lesson, and now the lesson was carrying them all. The sparrow sat in her nest as the sun dipped below the trees. Her walls were thinner now, the gold given away, but somehow the nest felt stronger than before. Or perhaps she felt stronger. It was hard to tell the difference. She thought of her mother who had woven the first version of this nest so many seasons ago, who had spoken in small lessons that took years to bloom, who had trusted that meaning would arrive when it was ready. The forest was quiet now, the storm a memory already fading into story. The other birds had settled into their new nests, and one by one their songs had stilled into sleep. But the sparrow stayed awake a moment longer, watching the golden threads glimmer across the branches. She had thought once that wisdom was something you found and kept, a treasure to be guarded. But the thread had taught her otherwise. Wisdom was a living thing. It grew only when it moved. It strengthened only when it was shared. Her mother's voice came one last time, softer than a breath. What you carry carries you, and what you give away becomes yours forever. The sparrow smiled, a small thing, barely visible but real. Tomorrow there would be seeds to gather and nests to repair, and 1,000 small tasks that made up a life. The jay would probably start mocking again. The finch would probably complain. The wren would probably worry, but the crow would be watching. And now he would be listening too. That was enough. That was everything. The sparrow tucked her head beneath her wing and let sleep carry her into dreams of gold and wind and all the truth still waiting to be found. This was the story of the fable. If you are the fable, your voice finds meaning in metaphor. You see patterns others miss. You translate truth into connection, not by preaching, but by living the lesson until it becomes a gift you can give. The smallest thread holds, and what you carry carries us all. You've just heard the Fable Bedtime Story, one of the 8 archetypes in the Wild Lore framework. To discover your own archetype and learn to weave your truth into connection, take the Wild Lore quiz at wildlore.co. Your story is waiting to be told.